Imagine, like, spending 20 years of your life just desperately trying to get home.
Right, yeah.
You survive wars, you survive shipwrecks. I mean, you outsmart literal
It's
monsters.
just relentless.
Exactly. And then when you finally crawl back onto your own property, you're disguised, you're totally exhausted, and the only living creature on Earth that actually recognizes you is an old dying dog just lying in the dirt.
Which is such a brutal image.
It really is. But according to Christopher Nolan, that incredibly heartbreaking, intimate moment is basically the emotional engine driving his next massive cinematic release.
Which is quite the pivot for him, honestly.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about a release on July 17th, 2026 from Universal Pictures, which is a 2-hour and 52-minute adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey.
And it's shot entirely on 70mm IMAX.
Right. Entirely.
It is just a staggering juxtaposition when you think about it. I mean, you have a director who is fresh off sweeping 7 Academy Awards for Oppenheimer.
Yeah, the master of cinematic physics, basically.
Exactly. A filmmaker who, blew up a real 747 in Tenet and recreated an actual nuclear test without CGI. And now he's aiming all of that technical ambition at a 2,700-year-old mythological poem.
It's wild.
It really is. So today we are pulling from a massive stack of sources for you. We've got production notes, trailer breakdowns, and some incredibly revealing interviews surrounding this huge theatrical event.
There's a lot of ground to cover.
For sure. And the mission of this deep dive is to unpack how a director who is so famous for non-linear time and massive explosions is turning ancient myth into a grounded, deeply human story.
Right.
And specifically, we need to figure out why Nolan claims this massive epic is actually just, quote, the ultimate dog story. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, it really demands our attention because this will be Nolan's 13th film.
Yeah.
And all 12 of his previous films currently hold a fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wow, all 12.
Yeah, all 12. He rarely misses. But, to truly grasp the scale of what he is attempting with the Odyssey, we actually have to start incredibly small.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, we have to kind of strip away the marble pillars and the museum piece quality of Greek mythology, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at the raw emotional core of why he chose this specific project.
Because, after Oppenheimer, Nolan and his producing partner, Emma Thomas, essentially had a blank check.
They could do whatever they wanted.
Literally anything. The industry was their oyster. They could have taken on any established franchise or, adapted a massive sci-fi bestseller.
Right. But Nolan explicitly stated he wanted something he could own completely.
Which is a funny way to talk about a text that has existed for 3 millennia, you know?
It is. But when interviewers pressed him on that, asking, why he chose the Odyssey over a modern original script, he didn't even mention the Sirens or the sea battles or the Wrath of Poseidon.
No.
He pointed directly to that dog, Argos.
Which initially sounds baffling, right? Especially when you're marketing a 3-hour IMAX blockbuster. You don't usually sell a 70mm epic on the back of a pet.
You really don't. But let's examine the mechanics of that specific scene in the original text. So, Odysseus has been gone for 20 agonizing years.
Right. 10 years fighting the Trojan War.
Exactly. And then 10 more years just lost at sea, enduring unimaginable trauma. So when he finally reaches the shores of his kingdom in Ithaca, he's disguised as a beggar to avoid being assassinated by his political rivals.
Right, because his home is overrun.
Right. So he walks through his own courtyard. His staff doesn't know him. His old friends look right past him. But there's Argos.
A dog he trained as a puppy, right? Before he left for war, who is now just totally neglected and discarded.
Yes. And Argos lifts his head. He drops his ears. He wags his tail. He recognizes his master through the disguise, through the 20 years of aging and the sea salt and the scars.
Wow.
And then right there in the filth, the dog dies. He literally just held on long enough to see his master come home.
That is so heavy.
It is. And Nolan is arguing that if you anchor your film to that specific emotion, you aren't making a movie about a demigod fighting CGI monsters. You are making a movie about the agonizing weight of time.
You're making a movie about what it actually costs to be away from the people and the animals that you love.
Exactly.
It just completely recontextualizes the source material. But to make that work on screen, you have to fix the language barrier first.
Oh, absolutely.
Because people hear Homer and they instantly think of, high school English class, archaic language, all the these and thous characters who feel like they are declaiming from a stage rather than actually just having a conversation.
Right. Well, what's fascinating here is how Nolan actually solves that problem.
Yeah.
He drew heavy inspiration from the 2017 translation of the Odyssey by Emily Wilson.
Yes, I was reading about this.
Yeah, Wilson was the first woman to ever publish an English translation of the poem. And she completely discarded the traditional approach of making the characters sound like they were speaking from atop Mount Olympus.
Which honestly acts as a massive shield against feeling. Like, reading the Emily Wilson translation sounds like taking a famous Renaissance painting that's been trapped under thick, dark lacquer for centuries and just taking a rag and wiping all that dust away.
That's a great way to put it.
Because suddenly you see the bright, vibrant colors underway.
Exactly. And she achieved that by using plain, direct, emotionally present language. Instead of translating Odysseus's epithets into these grand, untouchable titles, she highlights his flaws.
Right.
She makes him sound exhausted, desperate, and remarkably human. And Nolan is utilizing that exact psychological framework for the script. These aren't stoic figures in a tapestry.
Right. They are messy, they are terrified, and they make terrible decisions.
Every terrible decisions.
Which really brings us to how this film is actually constructed. Because, if you have a messy, deeply flawed protagonist, Christopher Nolan is not going to just give you a simple, linear fairy tale.
No, never.
He always uses a protagonist's psychological state to sort of justify the actual cinematic structure of the film.
And we definitely see this in the trailers. The film is structured entirely as a memory.
Okay.
Yeah, the framing device centers around Odysseus, recounting his journey to the nymph Calypso, who is played by Charlize Theron, by the way.
Oh, wow. What a casting choice.
Right. And she has kept him captive on her island for 7 years. So the entire narrative we watch unfold, the wars, the monsters, the survival, is filtered through his memory as he tells it to her on a beach.
Meaning we are dealing with a deeply unreliable narrator.
Highly unreliable.
We are only seeing his victories and his failures, the way he chooses to frame them to his captor. And I really want to talk about the man doing the recounting here, because Matt Damon is playing Odysseus.
Yeah.
And we usually expect our Greek heroes to look like, indestructible supermen, like Brad Pitt in Troy or something.
Right. But Damon brings a completely different energy to this. Nolan described this version of Odysseus as a brilliant strategist, a survivor, and an everyman who has to use his intellect when his physical body fails.
That makes so much sense for Damon.
It really does. Much like Damon's roles in The Martian, or even, his supporting work in Oppenheimer, he grounds the impossible. He isn't overpowering his enemies physically. He is problem-solving his way out of hell.
And the problems are massive. But what stands out to me in the source material and what the production notes indicate Nolan is heavily leaning into is that Odysseus rarely fails because he is overpowered. He fails because of his own ego.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it's not weakness that gets him cursed, it's pride.
And the encounter with the Cyclops, Polyphemus, is just the perfect example of how that mechanism works.
Let's talk about that Cyclops sequence, because I think everyone knows the basic plot from grade school, right?
Sure.
Odysseus and his men are trapped in a cave. The monster is literally eating them alive. So Odysseus gets the giant drunk, blinds him with a sharpened stake, and sneaks his men out by clinging to the bellies of the Cyclops' sheep.
Right, so the blinded monster can't feel them escaping.
Exactly. It is a brilliant, desperate stealth mission.
And from a tactical standpoint, it is a total masterpiece. I mean, he is one. They make it back to their ships, they push off from the shore, and they are entirely free.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because he's free and clear, but then his fatal flaw kicks in. Odysseus literally cannot handle the victory being anonymous.
No.
He can't stand the idea that this monster doesn't know who beat him. So from the safety of the ship, he shouts his real name back at the blinded giant.
It's such a massive mistake.
Think about that for a second. Odysseus is basically that toxic gamer who pulls off an incredible stealthy win against a difficult boss, but his ego is so huge, he can't resist turning on his mic to trash talk his opponent.
That is exactly what it is.
And by doing so, he ends up ruining his own campaign for the next 10 years.
Because that monster happens to be the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. So by giving up his name, Polyphemus can now pray directly to his father for vengeance, which dooms Odysseus and his crew to a decade of suffering on the water. And while your gamer analogy is humorous, it perfectly isolates the tragic mechanism Nolan is so fascinated by.
It's self-sabotage, plain and simple.
Completely. Look at his entire filmography. I mean, the protagonist in Memento literally lies to himself to create an unsolvable puzzle just so his life has purpose.
Oh, totally.
And J. Robert Oppenheimer constructs his own political and moral traps. Nolan builds his career on exploring brilliant men whose own hubris creates the prisons they spend the rest of their lives trying to escape.
Wow.
And Odysseus creates his own 10-year purgatory simply because he couldn't keep his mouth shut.
And because the film is framed through his memory, you really have to wonder how much guilt Matt Damon is going to be projecting in those scenes.
Exactly.
He knows he caused the deaths of his crew, but his internal flaws aren't just keeping him stranded on the water. They are creating a devastating external crisis back home.
They really are.
We have to shift our focus from the Mediterranean Sea to the island of Ithaca now. Because while Odysseus is out there dealing with witches and Sirens, the battle for survival on the home front is just as intense.
It serves as a necessary parallel journey in the film. Because Ithaca is crumbling under a massive political vacuum, you have dozens of ruthless, ambitious suitors who have essentially occupied Odysseus' estate.
Just living in his house.
Right. They're slaughtering his livestock, drinking his wine, and applying incredibly violent pressure on his wife, Penelope, to declare her husband officially dead and marry one of them.
And Penelope is played by Anne Hathaway. Now, historically, pop culture has not been kind to Penelope.
No, not at all.
People usually picture her as this sort of passive, weeping woman just sitting by a window waiting for a man to save her. But based on the trailers and what we know of the script, Hathaway is playing a brilliant politician who is actively stalling a hostile corporate takeover.
Penelope's political intelligence absolutely rivals her husband's tactical genius here. She realizes she cannot defeat these men physically, right? She's outnumbered. So she resorts to psychological warfare.
Which is brilliant.
It is. She announces to the suitors that she will choose a new husband, but only after she finishes weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus' elderly father.
Think about a time you've had to, stall a major life decision or hold off a toxic situation at work where you felt completely outnumbered.
Right.
Now imagine having to do that every single day for years, knowing that if you slip up even once, you lose your home and your life.
And the mechanism of her survival is agonizing, because every single day she sits in the Great Hall in full view of her enemies, weaving this intricate shroud.
Okay.
And every single night, in secret, she carefully unravels all the work she did that day.
Wait, she undoes the whole thing?
Every single night. She buys herself years of time through sheer willpower and deception.
It is just an incredible display of endurance. And, right beside her in this pressure cooker is her son, Telemachus, played by Tom Holland.
Right.
And he is fighting a completely different kind of battle. It's really a journey of faith. He's holding on to the belief of a father he never actually knew.
Yeah, Telemachus has grown up entirely in the shadow of a ghost. And the primary force trying to crush that faith is Antinous, the lead suitor, who's played by Robert Pattinson.
Which is such a good casting.
Oh, it's perfect. We saw Pattinson turn existential dread into an art form in The Batman, but here he operates as the embodiment of the ticking clock. He is systematically trying to break Telemachus' spirit so he can take Odysseus' place in the home and just claim the kingdom.
There is a moment in the latest trailer that just hits like a freight train. Pattinson's character corners Telemachus and essentially mocks him for pining for a daddy who is rotting at the bottom of the ocean.
So harsh.
And Holland just stares back with this shaky but entirely defiant voice and says, "My dad is coming home."
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can really see how Nolan is operating this film as a masterclass in tension.
Yeah.
The narrative is suspended completely between two poles, right?
Oh.
You have a father's desperate, violent journey to get back, and a son's unwavering refusal to let him go.
Yeah.
And the sheer weight of that emotional tension requires a cinematic canvas large enough to hold it without feeling melodramatic.
Which really brings us to the physical reality of how this movie was actually made.
Right.
Let's talk about the production, because the technical details are bordering on the absurd at this point. We mentioned it at the top. The Odyssey is the first film in history to be shot entirely on 70mm IMAX cameras.
Entirely.
I'm talking about the underwater sequences, the practical creature effects, everything. It's all propelled by a score from Ludwig Göransson, who is just dominating film music right now. But Nolan himself admitted in interviews that this production was an absolute nightmare to film.
And the logistics of what they attempted are staggering. The production traveled across Italy, Iceland, Greece, Morocco, Scotland, Ireland, and Western Sahara.
Wow.
Yeah. And they displayed this really intense geographical commitment to the text. For instance, they shot the Cyclops sequence on the island of Favignana off the coast of Sicily, primarily because classical scholars actually believe that is the historical location Homer was originally visualizing.
But they didn't just go to the locations, though. They built the mythology, practically.
Right.
They constructed a life-size Trojan horse and deployed it on a real beach in Sicily. Matt Damon actually gave an interview saying he was so stunned walking onto set and seeing this monolithic wooden structure that he started swearing on camera.
Really?
Yeah, he called it the most incredible thing he'd ever witnessed in his career.
And that includes filming sequences on the open ocean with IMAX cameras, which is insane.
Oh, okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay.
Because this just sounds exhausting.
It does.
Why put yourself, your crew, and your cast through an absolute nightmare? Like, why drag massive IMAX cameras, which are the size of mini fridges, by the way, and notoriously difficult to reload onto a rocking boat off the coast of Italy?
Right.
Why build a real wooden horse on a beach when you have Universal's budget? You could shoot this in a temperature-controlled studio in Atlanta and just CGI anything you want.
Well, it ultimately comes down to Nolan's core philosophy as a filmmaker, right? Physical reality always yields a better psychological result than digital simulation.
Okay, unpack that.
When actors are standing on a real beach looking at a real 50-foot wooden horse, the wind is actually hitting their faces. The sand is in their eyes. The sheer overwhelming scale of the physical object alters their performance. The fatigue is real.
So the tangibility makes the stakes real for the actors, which then translates through the lens directly to the audience.
Exactly that. He isn't treating this like a fantasy film. By grounding the production in practical effects and real locations, he is turning myth into history. He is essentially shooting the ancient world as if it were a documentary subject.
Grounding the fantasy is clearly the ultimate goal here. And speaking of grounding, there's one specific casting choice we have to touch on, because it perfectly illustrates how Nolan is bridging the gap between the ancient world and the modern audience.
Oh, yes.
He cast Travis Scott as a bard.
Which is a very deliberate and heavily analyzed artistic choice. We really have to remember that the Odyssey was not originally a book you bought at a bookstore. It was an oral tradition.
Right, it was performed aloud.
Exactly. It was sung and transmitted through generations by bards. And these performers had to memorize upwards of 12,000 lines of poetry.
12,000! That's insane!
Yeah, and they did this using a specific rhythmic meter called dactylic hexameter. The rhythm was the mnemonic device that allowed them to actually recall the story. And Nolan explained in his production notes that modern rapping is the closest contemporary equivalent to that ancient tradition.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
It is the art of complex storytelling through rhythm, cadence, and breath control.
So, a bard in ancient Greece was essentially like a freestyle rapper writing a specific beat to keep the story flowing.
Yes, exactly.
By casting Travis Scott, Nolan is drawing a direct, visceral line between ancient oral traditions and modern music. It takes a museum piece and basically plugs it straight into an amplifier.
It really does.
It shows the listener that the underlying mechanics of how human beings tell stories to one another really haven't changed in 3 millennia.
The tools have changed, sure, but the rhythm of the human experience remains exactly the same.
So, what does this all mean for us when we strip away the massive 70mm IMAX spectacle, when we look past the sea monsters, the practical Trojan horses, and the divine interventions from, Zendaya playing Athena?
Right.
What are we actually left with? We are left with a deeply human story about longing. It's about a complicated man who has made terrible mistakes, who is battered, exhausted, and bleeding, and who just wants to go home. And it's about a family and a dog who completely refuse to stop waiting for him.
That sense of longing is the engine of the entire epic. And there is a final lingering thought I think you should consider, which is perfectly encapsulated by the trailer's haunting voiceover from Odysseus.
Oh, yeah, I know the line you're talking about.
He says, "After years of war, no one could stand between my men and home, not even me." It forces the audience to really think about the ultimate choice Odysseus makes on Calypso's island.
Which is the crux of that memory framing device.
Yeah.
Charlize Theron's character offers him a literal escape from reality.
She is a goddess, offering him literal immortality. If he stays with her in this eternal, perfect paradise, he will never age. He will never suffer another day in his life.
All the trauma would just be gone.
Exactly. The trauma of the sea and the war would be gone. And yet, every single night, Odysseus sits on the beach, stares out at the water, and weeps.
Wow.
He actively chooses to leave immortality behind. He chooses to return to mortality. He wants a body that will break down in age. He wants a world full of pain, and he wants to return to a dog that is going to die the very second he lays eyes on him.
So you really have to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Is a flawless, eternal life actually worth less than a messy mortal life with the people we love?
That's the question.
Through the massive scale of this epic, Nolan seems to be asking us if our flaws, our grief, and our inevitable ultimate end are exactly what make us human in the first place.
To choose the pain because the pain means it's real. And it all comes back to that dog in the dirt. It is the ultimate anchor to mortality.
That is just a heavy, beautiful thought to leave on. I highly encourage you to seek out the Emily Wilson translation. Consider what these ancient stories might mean to you in your own life, and just prepare yourself to experience this whole messy, mortal journey.
Absolutely.
Be sure to catch the Odyssey when it hits IMAX theaters on July 17th. Until then, keep looking for those bright colors under the dust.